And today we have a very important discussion with a very important guest. As you know, Dr. Swamy will be discussing this topic on development in Afghanistan and China and its implications for India. And our guest today is Professor Dr. Brahma Chellaney. I'll just give you a brief introduction. He is a geostrategist, scholar, author, and a commentator. He is presently Professor of Strategic Studies at the New Delhi-based Center for Policy Research, and he has been associated with the Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow of the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin and an affiliate with the International Center for the Study of Radicalization at King's College London. A specialist in international security and arms control issue, Professor Chellaney has held appointments at the Harvard, the Brookings Institution, the School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University and the Australian National University. He is the author of 9 books, which include Asian Juggernaut, Water, Asia's New Battleground, Water, Peace and War, Confronting the Global Water Crisis, and has served as a member of the Policy Advisory Group headed by the Foreign Minister of India until January 2000. He was an advisor to India's National Security Council, serving as the convener of the External Security Group of the National Security Advisory Board. Professor Chellaney is a frequent contributor to public conversation about international security on television and in the print media. He writes opinion pieces for the International Herald Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, the Japan Times, Mint, the Economic Times, and the Times of India. Professor Chellaney has a PhD in international studies. So with this brief introduction, I will go over to Dr. Swamy to initiate the discussion, but I have to thank my co-host, Professor Arvind Chaturvedi from Delhi and Ramesh Swamy from the United States for hosting this program together. I also have to thank our technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Tejas Navalgul, Gadgi Rakesh, Ishwar Iyer, Swaminathan, and Vishal Mehta, who are spread all over the country for putting this program and the technical support for this program. As you know, we had last week a very interesting discussion, and I'm very proud to inform you that we had a viewership of 68,860 viewers across the globe in 149 countries. So I thank our members and our viewers across the globe for the support for these topics, and discussion will take place on Sunday at 8 p.m. So with this, it is over to Dr. Swamy to initiate the discussion with our honorable guest, Professor Brahma Chellaney. Over to Dr. Swamy.
When you said last week, it was Nambi Narayanan, no?
Yes, Nambi Narayanan on the ISRO, then, now, and tomorrow. Yeah. That was the topic last week.
Well, it's a very brief comment I will make because we are all wanting to hear Professor Chellaney. We are now confronted with a hostile China. They have, as you yourself were amongst the first to point out, they had occupied a fair amount of our territory in Ladakh. Across the LAC, which was mutually agreed, was a temporary line till we come to a negotiated settlement about disputes on the border. But they flouted it and came across, and we have been very slow in reacting to that. Now, China, Pakistan together are supportive of Taliban. Taliban delegation went to Beijing. They were really treated extremely well, with giving a lot of importance. They met practically everybody, including Xi Jinping. And so they have now taken at least de facto control of Kabul. And de facto is only a technicality. And now they have a common border. Afghanistan has a common border with the POK, and through POK can reach our de facto border. And I think we are facing what I would call as a for the first time after a very, very long time, a first-class national security crisis. And therefore, I would like to request Professor Chellaney that take your time. We sit up to 9, and you have complete freedom to speak. And towards the end, when you're finished, we will ask some questions. And also, we'll see if the new setup that we have today, audience will be able to send questions. And then, this is your day, and so please go ahead. Thanks for coming. I know how much in demand and how busy you are, but still you found time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for those introductory remarks and also for the introduction. I share your views that this is a major national security crisis for India. Also, the main implication of the Afghanistan developments is that these developments are likely to strengthen the China-Pakistan nexus against India. So this is going to be of profound significance for Indian security. But let me start with a very simple question. Why is Afghanistan important? It's important because of its geographic location. It's located at the crossroads of 3 regions, at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and Southwest Asia. For 1,000 years, as you know, India was invaded and plundered by those who came in through the Hindu Kush. Today, one can say that the American President Joe Biden has enabled the terrorist takeover of Afghanistan. This has serious implications not only for India, but also for the US and the wider world. I would say that this terrorist takeover is a watershed moment in American and world history. It will go down in history books as formalizing the end of Pax Americana and the period of Western ascendancy. The geopolitical implications of the US defeat in Afghanistan at the hands of a terrorist militia are much more significant globally than the American defeat in Vietnam. When America lost in Vietnam, the implications were largely for the US and for Southeast Asia. But now the implications of the US defeat in Afghanistan are largely global. The Taliban's success in forcing out America will energize and embolden other terrorist groups in the global jihadist movement. We should not forget that Taliban plays a very key role in the global jihadist movement. It's a key element in the global jihadism. In effect, the US sowed the seeds of its own defeat and humiliation in Afghanistan, including by fighting the war in Afghanistan on one side of the Durand line. Even though the Taliban was a creature of Pakistan, even though Pakistan had sanctuaries in Pakistan, yet the Americans fought the war on one side of the Durand line. The result is that 20 years of America's war, and this was the longest war in American history, that war has ended with the very enemy the US removed from power, the Taliban, recapturing that country. Why has this happened? I think when the historians are going to debate this question. But to me, the answer is obvious. When an aging US president, while refusing to consider conditions on the ground, overrules his military generals and intelligence agencies and orders a hasty and ill-planned military action, it is a sure recipe for foreign policy disaster. The blame for the international humiliation wrought on the US by the terrorist capture of Afghanistan must be laid squarely at the door of Joe Biden. let's be clear, there was no strategic or domestic imperative for Biden to order a hasty and total pullout of the US force in Afghanistan. That had been under Trump been cut drastically to just 2,500 soldiers. 2,500 soldiers remaining in Afghanistan was certainly not a large military footprint for the US. Yet Biden, who's the oldest American to assume the presidency, he rebuffed his top military commander's advice and ordered all American troops to return home in mid-April. And by July 1st, they had more or less completed the troop withdrawal because they, on July 1st, they vacated the Bagram air base at night. Bagram was the nerve center of the war, the staging ground for operations. So on July 1st, when they secretly vacated Bagram at night, they effectively ended the war. And we've seen that it took only a month and a half for the Taliban since then to effectively recapture the whole Afghanistan. There is a big myth that the US was tired of the Afghanistan war and that Biden faced popular pressure to bring the troops home. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Afghanistan war is the only war the Americans have fought since World War II, where the majority's public support was sustained right through the course of the war. For 20 years, Gallup polling is showing that Americans were most supportive than opposed to that military involvement. This was in contrast to previous American wars, including in Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq, when the majority public opinion at some point turned unfavorable. So if there was any imperative for a rushed withdrawal, it had nothing to do with any strategic reason. It had nothing to do with domestic reason, nothing to do with public opinion. The only imperative was Biden's determination to honor a one-sided US deal with the Taliban, a deal that he had inherited from Trump. Look at the irony. Biden has been overturning the decisions and actions and policies of Trump. But on this deal with the Taliban, which is the world's deadliest terrorist force, he decided to follow in Trump's footsteps. Now, if Biden did not want to retain that small force of 2,500 American troops in Afghanistan, he had the option of leaving a smaller force than 2,500 in Afghanistan, a residual force that could provide critical air support and reassurance to Afghan forces. This would have averted the disaster that has now unfolded. But Biden, seeking to safeguard the deal with the Taliban, a deal that the Taliban had long violated, ruled that option out. So the result is the Taliban sweep in Afghanistan. The Taliban sweep in Afghanistan would not have been possible without the unwitting help the US has provided. The US first lent respectability and legitimacy to the Taliban, a terrorist militia, while systematically undermining the elected Afghan government. Since the beginning of last year, they have given the Taliban the equivalence, the same equivalence as the Afghan government. They forced the Afghan authorities to release more than 5,000 jailed terrorists. 5,000 jailed terrorists is a number equivalent to the size of two US Army brigades or regiments. Now, where are those 5,000 released terrorists? Today, they have helped spearhead the ongoing onslaughts. So the Americans did everything possible to undermine the Afghan government. In effect, the US threw its ally, the Afghan government, under the bus and got into bed with the Taliban. It was similar to the way the US earlier abandoned its Kurdish allies in Syria. Much has been made of the disintegration of Afghan forces, right? You are hearing a lot of commentary on why the Afghans did not fight, and the blame is being put on the Afghans. Nothing could be further from the truth than this portrayal of the Afghans being responsible for the disintegration of the defenses, of their defenses. The collapse of the Afghan defenses is directly linked to the US betrayal, with Biden's action tantamount to pulling the rug from under the Afghan military's feet. One has to keep in mind that the US trained and equipped the Afghan military not to be an independent force, but they trained and equipped the Afghan military to remain dependent on US and NATO support. When Biden withdrew 2,500 US soldiers, all the remaining US soldiers, that had a cascading effect. It triggered the withdrawal of 8,500 NATO coalition troops and some 18,000 US military contractors. The contractors were playing an indispensable role in keeping the Afghan Air Force and US supplied weapon systems operational. So when the contractors left, the Afghan Air Force's operational readiness collapsed. And the Afghan army relied on the US or coalition capabilities to bring in quick reaction forces, make available emergency logistics and air medevac, which is air medical lift, and provide close air support, including providing drones over any active battlefield for situational awareness. Drones are so important. If you have drones over a battlefield, where a battle is raging, you know exactly what's happening there, right? You have a situational awareness. Now, all these things that are so essential for combat all disappeared in one stroke. The rapid withdrawal of US and coalition forces, including of liaison teams that worked with Afghans to provide close combat support, left the Afghan military high and dry. And the exit of all the contractors decisively degraded the operational readiness of the Afghan Air Force, which was highly reliant on them for maintenance, spare parts, and logistics. The Afghan soldiers, as former CIA Director General David Petraeus said in the last couple of days, the Afghan soldiers have been bravely, he said, fighting and dying for their country until the US ditched them. This is the former CIA director saying it publicly. And when the US ditched them, it delivered a very heavy psychological blow on the Afghan soldiers, on the Afghan military, from which the Afghan military could not recover. So the important point to remember is that the big loser from the Afghan chaos is not Afghanistan, but the United States. The US has suffered a defeat, not just at the hands of the Taliban, but also at the hands of that militia's sponsor, Pakistan. That's where Dr. Swamy's point of a strengthening China-Pakistan nexus becomes so significant as well as ominous. As I explained, the geopolitical implications of the US defeat in Afghanistan are much more significant globally than the American defeat in Vietnam. The Taliban success in forcing out America is certainly going to embolden other terrorist groups and re-energize the global jihad movement. And the Taliban is set to declare an Islamic caliphate, as it did in 1996. in 1996, when it seized power, the first thing it did was declare an Islamic caliphate. And that caliphate lasted until the 2001 US-led invasion. Now, ending, everybody, like the Americans had been in Afghanistan for 20 years. Now, 20 years is a long time to be, waging war. And as I mentioned earlier, this was the longest war in US history. So nobody can question the American desire to end this long, protracted war. Ending the war made sense. But Biden's hasty exit, forcing all soldiers to return home within weeks, that was foolhardy. And look at the strange paradox that we are witnessing. Biden refused to retain 2,500 American troops in Afghanistan. And yet today, he has sent 5,000, twice that number, 5,000 troops back to Afghanistan, merely to evacuate US citizens and US embassy staff. 5,000 troops are in Kabul today, evacuating US citizens. In effect, Biden's chickens have come home to roost. The US could have quit Afghanistan without getting into bed with the Taliban and thereby undermining Afghan and regional security. There was a need to sign a deal with the Taliban. The faithful deal with the Taliban will go down as a historic blunder. The small US military footprint in Afghanistan that Biden inherited was easily sustainable on a long term because it involved modest cost and little risk to American lives. At the height of the American war in Afghanistan, there were 110,000 soldiers, 1.1 lakh soldiers. From that, the number came down under Trump just to 2,500 soldiers. 2,500 soldiers is a very small force, a small military footprint. And moreover, for the last 7.5 years, there was no US combat role in Afghanistan. People forget that. The US combat role in Afghanistan ended at the end of 2014. And when the US combat role ended at the end of 2014, American financial costs and casualties dramatically dropped. In this entire 7.5-year period since the combat role ended, the Americans have lost only 99 soldiers in Afghanistan, 99. Many of them in non-hostile incidents, like they are on a helicopter, the helicopter develops engine problem and it crashes. So not brought down by enemy fire, but because of an accident, soldiers died. Many of these 99 soldiers died because of accidents. In comparison, the Afghans, because Afghans were on the front lines for the last 7.5 years, right? For 7.5 years, the Americans were not on the front lines, the Afghans were on the front lines, and guess how many Afghans died? According to President Ghani, and this was the figure from last year that he released at the beginning of last year. So 1.5 years have passed since he released that figure. He said 45,000 Afghan security men have died since the US combat role ended. 45,000 as compared to 99 US fatalities. So this small US military footprint in Afghanistan could have been sustained. There was no domestic pressure in the US, no public opinion favoring an end to the war. So now in the next 5 minutes or so, because I want to wrap up this discussion, or maybe 5 to 7 minutes, so that we have more time for discussion. Yes. I will focus on two issues, Dr. Swamy. One is, what are India's options now? Yeah. And two, on China, the other issue that you raised.
Yes.
First, what are India's options? Let's remember that India has no geographic contiguity with Afghanistan. A lot has been said about India's 3 billion assistance to Afghanistan, whether that money has been wasted. Answer is no. That 3 billion assistance to Afghanistan helped set up major projects that served the Afghan people. Those projects have earned India goodwill at the grassroots level. According to a Gallup poll, the country most loved by Afghans is India. How did India earn that goodwill? That goodwill has been earned over many decades. And 3 billion in assistance to Afghanistan in this century is a very small sum of money for India, considering how much we dole out to a number of countries. And the Afghan goodwill toward India will not evaporate because of Taliban military successes. One thing India has to be cognizant of is not to yield to US pressure. US pressure over the years has led to very costly own goals by India. The biggest mistake India made was when under US pressure, India halted critical aid to Afghan President Najibullah.
Oh.
In the early 90s, as you recall, the Soviet Union had disintegrated. Najibullah was relying on India. Moscow had given India the role to provide assistance to Najibullah. He needed money, he needed arms, and this is not a real burden on India. Yet, the Americans pressured India, and we halted all assistance to Najibullah, leading to his ouster in 1992 and the Taliban's rise. So India contributed to the rise of the Taliban. India is paying for the Taliban's rise. And let's not forget the IC-814 hijacking, when a hijacked Indian airliner was flown to the Taliban bastion of Kandahar in 1999. Taliban's resurgence and its recoming to power is terrible news for India because Taliban, all said and done, is a proxy of Pakistan.
Yes.
And Pakistan will re-employ the Taliban for actions against India, including to train and arm Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed people in Afghanistan, as happened previously in the 1990s when the Taliban was in power. Taliban held areas were used by Pakistan for training terrorists against India. Another mistake India made is more recent. India has made a series of foreign policy mistakes. We never debate them in India. You never see an article on Najibullah, how Najibullah was ousted, and India's role. India has blood on its hands. And I only mentioned one example from the past, but there are a number of examples where India has betrayed its own friends. In fact, India traditionally has shown more respect towards enemies than to its friends. It often betrays its friends. But give you another example from recent times. In 2019, that is 2 years ago exactly or so, the US imposed oil sanctions on Iran. And these were unilateral sanctions on them by the Americans. They had no UN sanctity, UN stamp on them. India blindly heeded the US sanctions and stopped buying Iranian oil. This was unlike China. China till today has not stopped buying Iranian oil. In fact, because of India's stoppage of all imports of oil from Iran, Iran began offering huge discounts to China. So for more than 2 years, China has been having a ball. They have been buying Iranian oil at a heavy discount.
Yeah.
But the reason why I mentioned that is that by halting all oil imports from Iran, India undermined the relationship of trust with Tehran. Trust is very important in a partnership. The Iranians no longer trust India. They see India in the US camp, or they see India as a country very susceptible to US pressure. Iran is very important for India to play a role in Afghanistan because India can send critical supplies to Afghanistan by land only via Iran. There's no other route. There's no other route, right? To send supplies to Afghanistan. And India's blind heeding of US sanctions has hurt India's cooperation with Iran, including in Afghanistan. So the lesson is that yielding to US pressure militates against national interests and sends a message to the world that India is a soft state and can be pushed around.
Yeah.
When Biden announced his decision to pull out all US forces, he said in April, this was in April, 4 months ago, or less than 4 months ago, that the US did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. He's right. That was the only thing correct in his long statement.
Yeah.
On April 14th, when he held that press conference and said, I'm calling all American troops back. The US did not go to Afghanistan to nation build, as he said. The US went to Afghanistan to wreak vengeance for the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah, that's right.
It was left to nations like India to build highways, hospitals, dams, and the National Parliament building. Now, those highways, hospitals, dams, and National Parliament building are not going to be dismantled by the Taliban, certainly not the highways, hospitals, and dams, right? So India's investment in Afghanistan, at $3 billion that India invested, will hold India in good stead in the long run. Excuse me. But India's options today are highly limited in Afghanistan. And the situation is so fluid and so fast changing. We don't know whether warlords in Afghanistan are going to again mount a opposition to the Taliban, whether the secular elements or the non-Pashtun elements are going to resist Taliban rule. So at the moment, India can only wait and watch and play safe. Now turning to China, and that's my last part.
Yes.
China has, as you all know, long shielded Pakistan from international pressure over its harboring of terrorist groups. But after 9 Chinese dam engineers were killed in a terrorist-triggered bus explosion in northernmost Pakistan, China squarely blamed America's quote-unquote hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan for creating cross-border insecurity. While in private, China cannot be unhappy with the exit of a defeated America. It not only opens greater space for China's expansionism, but also shows how US power is in decline. The bus explosion, however, has made China realize that the fallout from the Afghanistan chaos threatens its regional interests. And the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang has proposed that Pakistan collaborate with Beijing in Afghanistan. In fact, Beijing will have to use Pakistan the largest recipient of Chinese financing under BRI, and also Pakistan as China's client state. So China will use Pakistan to increase its footprint in Afghanistan. Also, Afghanistan is important for China in terms of its BRI. Afghanistan's strategic location makes it geopolitically attractive for Beijing's BRI. So make no mistake, China will exploit the void in Afghanistan and also try to gain access to Afghanistan's vast mineral wealth. Not many people know this, that according to US estimates, Afghanistan is sitting on $2 trillion worth of mineral resources. Now, advancing such interests, including accessing mineral wealth, hinges on violence abating in Afghanistan. So violence in Afghanistan is not in China's interests. Yet, look at the paradox. We are talking about, I just mentioned the paradox, about the US, how they have sent back twice the number of troops that they withdrew just to evacuate their own citizens. But look at another paradox that relates to China's strategic ambitions. China today detains more than 1 million Muslims in a Muslim gulag in Xinjiang.
That's right.
Beijing views Islamic extremism as a pressing threat, and they use that as a justification for this largest mass incarceration of people on religious grounds since the Nazi era. Since the Nazi era, no country has imprisoned so many people on religious grounds. And yet, look at the paradox that China has built cozy ties with the Taliban, the marauding Islamist force. Well, if atheist communist China for more than half a century can be close to Pakistan, and Pakistan was the first Islamic republic of the post-colonial era. So if China can be such close allies of Pakistan, it's not a surprise that it's become strange bedfellows with the Taliban. Taliban is responsible for the world's deadliest terrorist attacks. The world's deadliest terrorist attacks are carried out by the Taliban.
Yes.
So what does this show? It shows the transactional approach. The transactional approach has long been a hallmark of Chinese foreign policy. When the Taliban seized power in 1996, they've seized power again now. I'm talking of the earlier capture of power in 1996. China established a very cozy relationship with that regime. It began direct flights between Urumqi and Kabul. And on the day 9/11 attacks happened in the US, the same day, a Chinese delegation was in Kabul signing an agreement on economic and technical cooperation with the Taliban regime. Such was the cooperation between the Taliban regime and China. And after the Taliban was ousted from power by the US-led invasion, China quietly maintained close ties with the Taliban in Pakistan. Much has been made of this potential for the Afghan conflict to spill over into Xinjiang. Now, this kind of a concern is so overblown. People don't even understand the geography.
Yeah.
First, China has a very short frontier with Afghanistan. The Xinjiang frontier with Afghanistan is only 76 kilometers wide, 76 kilometers wide. And that frontier is made of impossible high altitude terrain, high mountains. There's no way anybody can cross across that frontier. There are no tracks, even dirt tracks for people to cross over, that frontier. The only way people can grow from Afghanistan to Xinjiang is via Tajikistan. But the Chinese have deployed thousands of their own troops in Tajikistan, including on the Tajik-Afghan border. The Chinese also have their own troops in Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, right?
Right.
Thousands of them.
Yeah.
And Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir borders Xinjiang. Have you
Yes.
ever heard of China ever saying that any Pakistani terrorists have crossed from Pakistan-held J&K to Xinjiang? No, there's never been any example, any instance of Pakistani terrorists crossing into Xinjiang, because China has very secure borders and heavy deployment at frontiers. So there is no way that Afghan militants can infiltrate Xinjiang via Tajikistan, given the large Chinese military presence in Tajikistan. But I think as the bus explosion in Pakistan illustrates, China's concerns are essentially centered on its economic interests in Central Asia and Pakistan, and the safety of Chinese nationals who are working on projects there. The threat of terrorism, however, provides Beijing a convenient cover to advance its geopolitical interests. And with the US in retreat, China is likely to increase its strategic footprint in Afghanistan by leveraging its strategic relationship with Pakistan and its cozy ties with the Taliban. And to co-opt the Taliban, China has already dangled the prospect of providing the Taliban the two things the Taliban needs to govern Afghanistan. What are the two things the Taliban needs? Diplomatic recognition and much needed infrastructure and economic development assistance. China has dangled both these things. And the Taliban, rising to the bait, has gone out of its way to assuage China's concerns. So clearly, a Taliban-dominated Afghanistan will not only be under Pakistan's sway, but also greatly aid China's designs. It will, as Dr. Swamy said, strengthen this China-Pakistan nexus against India. America's exit has opened the path for an opportunistic China to make strategic inroads into Afghanistan and deepen its penetration, not just of Pakistan, but also of Iran and Central Asia. All this is going to compound India's foreign policy challenges. So I'll stop here.
Well, thank you. It's a very informative, very articulate presentation. We've learned a lot. I think I have to perhaps after some time, when matters settle down a bit, request you to come again and tell us what India should do in terms of steps without having to rely on any one country or the other. But today, let me just, before I ask my other colleagues, make one comment and one question. The comment is that when you mentioned Najibullah, I was reminded that when Chandrasekhar was Prime Minister, I was the senior most minister. And Najibullah made a special request that I should visit Afghanistan. And it was end of December, early January. It's very cold. But my colleague sitting here, Mr. Arvind Chaturvedi, was with me, assisting me in the Commerce Ministry. So both of us went. And Najibullah gave a tremendous reception to us, welcome to us. In fact, he came out of the palace into the street to receive me. I mean, that was the enthusiasm. And then he said that he wants, he feels betrayed by the Russians and he wants us to help out. Because as he said, and you have said, that has been reinforced, there's a lot of goodwill for Indians in Afghanistan. And I told him that we'll have to start slowly because we just come to power, and I don't know how much we can turn around very quickly. But he said, at least buy our badam. And he had one American badam, which we are were importing, and one Afghanistan badam, which was much smaller, but it was so nice and sweet compared to the American one. So I went back and I passed, as a commerce minister, I passed a law, a rule that nothing will be imported from any other country except Afghanistan. And you would be surprised at the furor. And ultimately, Rajiv Gandhi phoned me up to say that please, withdraw that order. I said, why? He said, because when I went to America in '85, I promised Ronald Reagan, who was president, that he will buy from his California farm all the badam that he grows there. And he says, good for Indo-US relationship. I mean, that's how cockeyed we were. I think when you mentioned about some of these things that we do to please the Americans, it is a very tragic thing. And Americans don't respect you for it. By the way, the Americans are great give and take people. You give something, take something. And if you give something without taking something, then they think you're an idiot. And if you take something and not give something, then they'll think you're a rascal. So with the Americans, you have to do that, but we didn't. I mean, on Iran, I perfectly agree with you. They're a Shia country, and they are natural friends of India. We have a historical relationship, and that's a question is, now China has come into vast parts of Ladakh, and you yourself have written about it, and so have I. And it has been kept secret. In fact, one of my parliament questions was declared, was withdrawn from by the secretariat, because I asked how much of our Ladakh land has been grabbed by China. And the question was listed. It's a perfectly normal question. But then the Secretary General said that it's the government of India has said that that information is secret. And I couldn't understand how, if a foreign power country forcibly occupies your territory, why should it be a secret? But anyway, I would really ask a question arising from that. Do we have a plan to deal with China on Ladakh at all? Or are they going to be allowed to, just eat away while we have all these discussions? We are going to invite Xi Jinping to BRICS Bank meeting, BRICS summit meeting in November, I'm told. And the preparations are going on pretty well. So are we not cognizant? Is your understanding of my party's government's China policy that you can make head or tail of what we are up to vis-a-vis China, in view of the fact that after 18 one-to-one meetings of Xi Jinping with Narendra Modi, he quietly sends his troops and grabs our territory, which is, by the way, mutually agreed as Indian, because we drew the line of actual control in 1993 to say, till the dispute is settled, this is yours and this we'll keep, including Aksai Chin. So what is your view about how China is going to proceed with us? Will it be encourage Pakistan only, or would they also feel encouraged to do something on Indian border, both on Arunachal and in Ladakh?
Well, today, Dr. Swamy, as you know, the entire India-China frontier from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh has become a hot border.
Yes.
And there are multiple standoffs between India and China, not just in Ladakh. There's a standoff on the Sikkim-Tibet border. There's also one standoff on the Arunachal-Tibet border. So the entire long frontier has been turned into a hot border, and this holds ominous implications for India. And the Chinese encroachments are not just restricted in Ladakh, as you know, that they are also encroaching on Bhutanese land, on Nepalese land, on Indian land in Arunachal Pradesh, and also they have sought to encroach on Sikkim land too. So we are facing multiple encroachments or encroachment efforts. And what happened in Ladakh in April 2020 showed our defenses in very poor light, because India was caught napping, and not a single army commander has been held to account. Nobody has been court-martialed, and I'm even in fact very worried about the buffer zones that have come up in 3 areas, where the PLA had encroached. One is Galwan Valley. The buffer zone came up in July last year. Then we had the Pangong buffer zone that came up in February this year. And then the most recent buffer zone this month in the Gogra area. All 3 buffers have one common element, that these buffers have come up on areas that were traditionally patrolled by India. So what China's strategy has been in these areas, first encroach and then dictate a buffer zone that actually pushes the Indians further back into Indian territory. Now, if you look at the Galwan buffer zone, Prime Minister Modi said, when he said "Na koi aaya na gussa," his speech, he was talking about Petrol Point 14, which is which the government of India has said repeatedly is Indian post, right? Now, where is today Petrol Point 14? Middle of the buffer zone. India has retreated 1.7 kilometers back from that PP14. So India has gone back into its own territory.
Yeah.
And similarly, what we are seeing in Gogra this month, that Patrol Point 17A, which has been a traditional Indian patrolling point, and that PP17A is not on the LAC. The LAC is further to the east.
That's right.
But we have agreed to a buffer with PP17A as the epicenter. And we have moved 2.5 kilometers back from PP17A. So in a sense, it's a win-win for China. It's winning twice against India. Right. First encroaching and then forcing dictating a buffer on India.
Yeah.
And again, there's no debate in India, so one doesn't know, because without a public discourse, there can be no pressure point on the government. If the government can, and I think it's not the government alone, the political leadership. I actually have come to the conclusion now, when I look at India's blunders over the decades, that we have always been blaming the prime minister in office. When Simla happened, it was Indira Gandhi's fault that she gave away all the battlefield gains without any quid pro quo. But what was the military leadership's role? Did they have no role to play? Did the chiefs did not say anything? They had the option of putting their foot down, right? No prime minister is going to go ahead with a with such a major giveaway if the chiefs say that this is a sellout, or if they say if you go this we're going to resign, right? No prime minister is going to go ahead with anything of this kind. So similarly, I think that whatever has happened in Ladakh, the blame lies squarely with the military leadership, and the kind of military leadership we have. There's been no accountability for India having been caught off guard in April 2020. Nobody has been held to account for number of lapses. There has been no debate even as to why we vacated the Kalashites. We said the Kalashites were on the Indian side. That was our leverage.
Yeah, I can add something to that. I can add something to that. I spoke one-to-one to one of the highest rank officer. I won't mention his name so not to get him in trouble. And I asked him, Kailash, you were sitting there and you suddenly went away. And the Chinese have just moved in and taken it over. And we were looking down on the, in Pangong Lake area, we were looking down at the Chinese bunkers and so on, which they had been there. And so yes, that strategic position, why do you give it up? He said, well, we were told that we need to create an atmosphere for negotiations. So we should do that. And they withdrew it, and the Chinese coolly came and occupied it. Same thing with Depsang. Nobody talks about Depsang. The Chinese are in full, and that's very near. I think, yeah, I agree with you. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I wanted to support
right.
you on this.
The Depsang is the most critical area for India. It's also where the Chinese encroachment is the largest.
That's
they have
right.
come in very deep.
Yes.
18 kilometers into India.
That's right.
And blocked India's access to its traditional patrolling points.
Right.
Hundreds of square kilometers of Indian territory in Depsang is now under PLA control. And Depsang is where, Depsang is a critical point that is vital for Siachen Glacier, also vital for India to, at some point, to regain Aksai Chin.
And look at Karakoram Pass.
Exactly. It's kind of, in fact, the Depsang sector is up to the Karakoram Pass highway, which the new highway, the critical highway, is up to the base of the Karakoram Pass. And today that highway has become vulnerable because of the Chinese encroachment deep into Depsang. So now we're trying to construct another road, which will take a number of years. And by then the Chinese would have encroached somewhere else, making that new road also vulnerable. So that story goes on, unfortunately.
Well, anyone else wants to ask a question? We're running out of time, but we'll take some liberties.
I have a very small question to Professor Chellaney. That is, when Najibullah was ousted in 1992, and nobody came to his help, no other country came to his help, he took refuge in the United Nations headquarters in Kabul. And for quite some time he was there before he was murdered. Unlike Najibullah, why Mr. Ghani did not call for any help, either from any country? He did not seek any help. In fact, he immediately surrendered. And he did not even seek United Nations help before moving to Tajikistan. As the TV news is saying just now, he has moved half an hour back to Tajikistan.
Well, to answer your question in 2 words, US betrayal. US betrayal explains all that.
Yeah.
Why do I say that? The Americans trained and equipped the Afghan forces. But as I said earlier in the presentation, that they train and equip the Afghan forces not to be independent, but to remain reliant on American and NATO support for everything, from maintenance and logistics to close air support to common things that militaries do in other countries. So when all that disappeared, when Biden withdrew the American forces and the contractors all left, the Afghan military collapsed. Now, when the military collapses in such a dramatic fashion, I don't think Ghani ever expected that to happen. Nobody expected that the Americans would withdraw so rapidly. Within weeks they withdrew, right? The decision was announced in mid-April. By July 1st, they had pulled out of Bagram and ended the war effectively. So this happened in 2.5 months. And then the blow that the Afghan security forces suffered when they realized that when the Taliban began this multi-pronged offensive across the country, The Afghan military was unable to mount a challenge. And when the defenses collapsed, it left Ghani and others very little time to do anything. As far as Najibullah is concerned, going back to Najibullah, Najibullah took refuge in the UN compound in Kabul because there was no way for him to escape to another country. His family came to India, as you know. And in fact, I have been close friends with the family for many years. But he got trapped because there was no way for him to be evacuated from Kabul. And his tragic end was avoidable. And I think India's own sordid role in his ouster is something that really troubles me, because it shows that India is so vulnerable to American pressure. And that American pressure is also manifest from very recent development of last year, when the Doha deal was signed by the US with the Taliban. It was a sellout to Pakistan and to the Taliban, right?
Yeah.
And the deal text said that the Taliban will not attack US and its allies, which implicitly excluded India, because India is not an ally of the US, but a strategic partner, right? And yet, India not only supported the Doha deal, India was physically present at the signing ceremony in Doha.
Yeah.
It really shows how vulnerable we are, vulnerable to American under successive governments. That's the one common element in Indian foreign policy under successive governments that I've seen. That if the Americans say something, we're willing to do their bidding, and that's the reason why the Americans don't respect you. As Dr. Swamy said, if they believe in give and take. If you're willing to just obey them and not seek anything in return, the Americans will treat you like dirt. This is the way the Americans treat others with contempt. When they find them to be pushovers. Yes, it's only those who really talk up to them, like China. They give respect to such countries.
That's right.
And I think the Indians, especially Indian political leaders, given that many of them come from semi-urban areas, they have no exposure to international relations prior to taking office. They're not foreign policy savvy, and certainly they don't understand American thinking and American strategy. They become very, very easy to manipulate, and I think that and also the other Indian failing is that we don't learn from the mistakes of our predecessors. No prime minister will look at the failures or the mistakes of his predecessors. So Modi will repeat the mistakes of Vajpayee from his own party.
Yeah.
For example, if you look at how Modi made an unscheduled stopover in Lahore to reach out to a prime minister.
Yeah.
That's the same prime minister that Vajpayee tried to quote by going by bus to Lahore and then crying in public that my bus got hijacked to Kargil, right? So history repeated itself under two successive BJP prime ministers. Same thing on China. We're seeing the same mistakes being repeated, including under two BJP prime ministers. So, and this really underscores the fact that prime ministers don't look back at the mistakes of their predecessors and learn from them.
Right.
I have a question, Professor Chellaney. I want to find out if India could have, with the help of America, played an effective role if they had planned it well in Afghanistan, if it was about a year or more earlier. Could India have a better role to play when America was leaving Afghanistan?
Not really, because the Americans never wanted the Indians in Afghanistan. The Americans, especially under President Biden, are mollycoddling Pakistan. The last thing they would have allowed is US-India cooperation in Afghanistan. It was out of question. They specifically asked India not to have any boots on the ground in Afghanistan, and so they were very very sensitive to Pakistani concerns, and they did not want Indian military presence of any kind in Afghanistan. And of course, Indian military presence in Afghanistan in any case did not make any sense to me, because given the fact that India has no geographic contiguity with Afghanistan, so any kind of Indian military involvement in Afghanistan would have been in terms of logistics extremely complex, extremely risky, and dependent on others, including Russia and Iran. And today, as you know, the Russians have embraced the Taliban. They have established their own cozy relationship with Taliban in recent months. And our own relationship with Iran is not good anymore. So any kind of Indian military entanglement in Afghanistan would have proved very costly to Indian interests.
There's a view which I subscribe to, is that the Russians are junior partners of China. They owe them so much money.
That's true. That's very well said. In fact, they're junior partners of China, not just in Afghanistan or in Pakistan or in Iran. Yes. They're junior partners of China in their own backyard of Central Asia. Central Asia is was part of the old Soviet Union, but today they are junior partners of China in Central Asia. They're playing second fiddle to China in the SCO.
That's right. Ramesh.
And in BRICS also.
Huh?
And in BRICS also.
Yeah, that's correct.
Sorry.
Ramesh.
Go ahead.
You just brought up a very important point in SCO BRICS. I mean, what is the sanctity of India being a part of Quad of the BRICS even now? Is there any validity based on the way the current Biden government is going to continue to treat India?
Well, it's sort of a balancing act on the part of India, because India, all said and done, is effectively pursuing a pro-US foreign policy. No Indian policymaker will say that, but for all intents and purposes, India is pursuing a US-friendly foreign policy. So being a member of SCO and being a member of BRICS, and having also this RIC meeting, that is Russia, India, China trilateral meeting, all are designed to provide the veneer of balance. In reality, India is very much in the US camp. As I mentioned, even the Doha deal was embraced by India. An anti-India deal, if India can embrace, what does that show about Indian foreign policy? And actually have your diplomats present in Doha to provide India's stamp on the deal.
Yeah.
It couldn't be something more shameful than that, in my view.
Yeah, okay. That's right.
So, in fact, the Doha deal has led to the unraveling of Afghanistan. It's a direct consequence of that. So it's a shame on India's part that it gave its stamp of approval to the Doha deal, and because India has been now left to fend off the new threats that are going to emerge from the developments in Afghanistan.
Interestingly, I just finished one point. Interestingly, in March, Dr. Swamy, Biden in a press conference emphatically said, when there is a question, if the troops come back from Afghanistan, what will happen will Taliban take over? He said, absolutely not. America has trained 300,000, he said twice, 300,000 troops, and they will hold strong. it is a shameful defeat. I mean, like as Professor Chellaney said, that now he's sending 5,000 troops. I mean, 2 days ago, you said you're going to pull out, and then they said, are you going to retreat? No. Are you going to rethink? They said no. Now it's suddenly coming back at 5,000. Sadly, we have a senile man as the president of my country who, I mean, it's just ridiculous to say. I mean, it is embarrassing, bottom line embarrassing to see what this guy is doing today. Within what we, as perception from where we see it.
Well, I think after the debacle in Afghanistan and the international humiliation this will wreak on the US, the critics of Biden who have been saying that Biden has cognitive problems, those critics, their voices will be, will be heard with some greater attention, if not respect. But the fact is that when you have an old man who refuses to listen to his generals and to his intel agencies, and who, for no strategic reason, orders a full withdrawal of US troops within weeks, that leader will face inevitable criticism at home. So you will see the coming. Sorry, go ahead.
No, much ahead of his own deadline of August 31st.
Well, the August 31st deadline was just, but it was artificial. He'd already withdrawn on July 1st.
Yeah, that's right.
The only people remaining were the couple of hundred soldiers guarding the US embassy and the Kabul airport. That's all.
Correct.
But look at the irony. When he first announced the total withdrawal of all US troops, he said they'll be all home by 9/11 this year, September 11th, right?
That's right. That's right.
It never came to his senile mind that September 11 marks the anniversary of a gruesome terrorism in the US.
That's right.
And he set that anniversary as a deadline. Now now 9/11 will come this year. September 11 will come this year with the Taliban in Kabul.
That's right. Celebrating it.
celebrating the anniversary in Kabul.
I perhaps a last question for Professor. You just now mentioned about what could happen in USA, the president, the military and the media and all that reacting to what Biden has done. But you and Dr. Swamy have been clearly stating what is happening in Ladakh and China coming in, all that. Contrary to that famous statement of koi aaya nahi, koi gaya nahi. When do you think the Indian media and the Indian public will really rise up to know the reality of what happened in Ladakh region across the LAC?
Well, I think we should all learn the lesson from the US, especially from the US media. This disaster in Afghanistan would not have happened but for the mainstream US media. The mainstream US media is a fawning media that treats Biden just the way the North Korean media treats dear leader Kim Jong-un. Biden is the dear leader of the mainstream US media. They slobber over him as if he's the dear leader of America. When he ran for president, the mainstream media spearheaded his presidential campaign. They trashed his opponent. They concealed the Hunter Biden scandal. And when in April this year, Biden announced this total withdrawal from Afghanistan, not one newspaper in the US or one television network questioned that decision. In contrast, when Trump drastically ordered the reduction of US troops to 2,500 by ignoring the advice of military generals, the US media roasted him. So, when you have a fawning media, you have no debate, you create the room for disaster. So that's a lesson we should be drawing, that
That's right.
discourse and debate are very important. Everything that the government does needs to be scrutinized, because those in power can lose touch with reality, or because they're so preoccupied with their daily challenges may have no time to reflect. That's why we need debate and even criticism. Constructive critiques are so important and healthy in any democracy.
No, I
Yeah,
think even advisors don't tell the leaders the truth, because they're afraid that if they say something unpleasant, they may be replaced.
Mm.
Dr. Swamy, you also mentioned Natula Pass quite often. I mean, that part too, right?
Sorry?
Between China and India.
Sorry?
Natula
Natula
Pass.
Pass.
Yeah.
Atullah Pass.
The,
Dr. Swamy, I think what Professor Chellaney
I think
said
we
right
are
now about the
really
font.
pushing him for taking advantage of his generosity at
The last
times.
question. So
Keep
the
that
last,
in mind. Last question. Okay.
Last question. So Professor mentioned about the fawning media. I think it's a clear message that the Indian media needs to shape up, or basically that's exactly what is getting repeated. What's happening in the US is getting mirrored in India, where their constructive criticism or true criticism as to what on a policy front is considered, unacceptable.
I don't think it's being we have the same parallel. The reason is that things in India are very different. There are 4 major newspapers in India. Looking at just the newspaper world, 2 are establishment newspapers, 2 function like opposition newspapers. So you have, but you see, all the 4 papers don't promote debate. What they do is that they promote trivial and petty news coverage. The whole entire focus of the media, whether it's television or the press, is on petty politics.
Yes.
I said the other day on Twitter that there's a new word that has become popular called sportainment. Sportainment is the fusion of sports and entertainment. In India, politics is sportainment. It's the biggest sportainment in the country.
Yeah.
And the media is the biggest sportainment industry, because the media is not news anymore in India. Media is entertainment. It's the entire focus of the media is on petty things. You just look up any just look up, for example, the 2 largest newspapers in the country. Just go to their website, Times of India and the Hindustan Times. See what they cover on their website. This is what they cover in their print editions. This is not a replica of what's happening in the US.
Well,
So in India, I think the problems are more deep-seated, because journalism has collapsed in India, and it's become 95% of journalists in India are nothing but stenographers. All they're saying is, he said this, he said that. This is all they're reporting, and most of journalism is this. There's no attempt to analyze, to collate things, to present news in a readable form. Nothing, it's and no serious attempt to look at serious issues. Certainly, serious issues frighten them, because they don't have those capacities, among journalists now to deal with serious issues. So if you have a debate on Afghanistan, as it's at the moment, they'll again focus on silly questions. They never have a real debate even on television. It's more about presenting different faces on television. It's not about the content. Again, much of the media is like that in India. It's very unfortunate. And this is beyond what the government can do. The government cannot reform the media. The government cannot oversee the media. The government cannot improve the standards of journalism in India. So this is a serious, very serious issue in my view, because the media also is very influential. The other day, Justice Nariman picked up some newspaper report. The Indian Express had reported about this Hindu ritual of people doing this Ganga Jal, and he ordered the UP government to stop that on the basis of a newspaper report. So people, so in some ways, the newspapers are also trying to run the government and run the judiciary by the nose. That's the reason why we need first pure institutions in journalism. That is, journalists overlooking standards in journalism. You need an ombudsman. You need a press council with real teeth. You need oversight, not by the government, but by independent people, largely people from the media world. So you need reform, but this reform has to come from within. It cannot come from outside.
That's right. Okay.
Thank you.
Who's going to conclude?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chellaney. You really provided a very rich content to our program today, whether it is on Afghanistan or on China or on government or on media. In fact, the last part, we spent about 7-8 minutes on media. There has been a lot of criticism in the media about media, saying that what they present, in that if you want to talk about 2 newspapers, including the electronic channels and all that, they only say the government is saying this, opposition is saying that. Nobody is saying what is the truth. And if the truth is not what government is saying, nobody is saying the government is lying. Nobody has guts. In fact, there should be a debate on this issue. In fact, you pointed out in this direction that we need to discuss whether it is press council or what we call media council. In fact, there should be media council instead of press council. And what should be the role? There's no teeth anyway. And thank you very much for providing a very rich historical perspective on Afghanistan. I remember having been to Kabul with Dr. Swamy, as Dr. Swamy mentioned, on December 28th, 1990. We were lodged in the Indian embassy. And just morning that we arrived, there was a bomb blast opposite the embassy. There was a hotel. And that bomb blast, we were told, was by Taliban. At that time, Taliban was not so strong a force. But we were also told by the embassy officials that Taliban was being funded by Pakistan. And Taliban was earning money by smuggling of the tires, car tires, that we were told at that time. And we had a delegation of the traders with us who dealt in the fruit, dry fruits. And Dr. Swamy's decision, when Dr. Swamy mentioned about the badam after he came back from Afghanistan, was really very bold decision. Dr. Swamy, thank you very much. You have been very consistent on both Afghanistan and China. In fact, this morning, your tweet, which was actually a redo of 2018 tweet on Afghanistan. So this shows your consistent, and surprisingly, Professor Chellaney and you, both of them have been in same unison in many issues, especially on China and foreign policy of the Indian government. Thank you very much, Jagdish Shetty ji. Thank you very much, Ramesh Swamy ji, and our technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Tejas Swaminathan, Gadgi Rakesh, Vishal Mehta, for providing a technical support. We will be meeting next Sunday again at 8 p.m. in Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga with a new topic, with a new guest, and with Dr. Subramanian. Till then, thank you very much.
No, one promise you must exact from him. That is, in sometime in the future, when another major event takes place, he will agree to come back and address us again.
Well, I hope not for another, not for another crisis.
As Dr. Swamy said,
I hope not for another crisis. We don't need more crises.
Yes, true.
No, but we need to to have people who can call a spade a spade.
Yeah, that's
without mincing words. Without mincing words, you have been very frank and forthright. In
call me when you have some good news to discuss.
All right. Okay.
But Professor, I'm
thank you
telling
very
you,
much.
the comments,
Thank you
the
very
comments on YouTube
मैं
were saying,
अपने
when
दर्शकों
can
को
we
ये
have
भी
part
बता
2?
दूं कि बहुत जल्दी हम हिंदी में ज्ञान गंगा वर्ड्स ऑफ विजडम का
आने वाले हैं।
एक रेगुलर चैनल शुरू करेंगे। वो शनिवार को होगा और हिंदी भाषी दर्शकों के लिए जो विशेषकर उत्तर भारत से आते हैं उनके लिए इन विषयों पर हम बातचीत करेंगे। बड़े गूढ़ विषय हैं और हमारे पास जो विशेषज्ञ आते हैं हमारे कार्यक्रमों में वो इतना अच्छा ज्ञान रखते हैं कि हम जनता के साथ, अपने दर्शकों के साथ उन चीजों को साझा कर सकें और जनता में एक अभिरुचि पैदा करें और उनके ज्ञानवर्धन में वृद्धि हो। अगले संडे को 8 बजे फिर मिलेंगे। तब तक के लिए नमस्कार, जय हिंद।
जय हिंद।